The Remarkable People Podcast. Check it out. The Remarkable People Podcast. Listen, do, repeat. For life. The Remarkable People Podcast.
Hello, my remarkable friends. Welcome to this week's episode of the Remarkable People Podcast, the John Petrelli story. This week, I had a great time with John. We met through a mutual friend of yours and mine, Danny Covey. Danny's been on the podcast. He's a great human. I've known him for over 25 years. You can check out his story in the link below in our show notes. I believe he was in season 1 of the Remarkable People Podcast, but he is still a friend of the podcast to this day. And he just launched his new book, Scar Tissue, that shares his life story in written form. So check it out. But Danny was kind enough to match up John and I, and man, we hit it off. You're going to hear this episode that John's going to share so much life wisdom and just an inspirational story. He talks about how he should have been in jail. He should have died, how he almost killed the guy with a kick to the head, but how God allowed him to get to California and have a new start where he met people. He was at the right places at the right time. He ended up becoming a famous personal trainer. He ended up being modeling on billboards with actresses and models like Giselle. He ended up being friends with world famous actors and comedians that you're about to hear. And he is just a remarkable human. But on top of it all, he comes down with a illness that either caused or was a catalyst for an underlying autoimmune disease, and it almost killed him and crippled him for life. So you're not just going to hear about what he was able to overachieve, what he was able to achieve, but what he was able to overcome. And he shares with us the practical steps of how he did it, so you and I can too. So get out your pens and paper, your favorite beverage, and enjoy this episode of the Remarkable People Podcast, the John Petrelli story. And like always, don't just listen to this great content John brings you, but do it each day, the stuff you know you need to. Repeat it over and over again, because that consistency brings the return, so you can have a great life in this world and, most importantly, in eternity to come. Share it with your friends and family. Share it with strangers. We want this podcast to reach millions of people around the globe, not for our fortune and glory like Indiana Jones talks about, but for God's glory and your fortune and just good life for everybody. So I love you. I'm Dave Pasqualone, and welcome to this episode with our friend, John Petrelli. Hey, John, how are you today, brother?
I'm doing well. Yourself?
I'm doing great.
Oh, thank you for having me, man. I really appreciate being here. I know we talked a little bit off air beforehand and today, and I am so into what you're doing and helping people. We have a mutual friend that introduces Danny, and I feel blessed to be here. And I feel like, look at, man, we all have a story, but if we don't have a platform to put that story together on and bring it out to the world, it will just die on its own. So I thank you for offering all of us a place to put the story out where we could possibly help one people or a million people. You know, it's beautiful. Thank you, brother.
Oh, you're very welcome. And for myself and our whole remarkable community, man, we're thankful you're here today, John. I just told our listeners a little bit about you, just a scratching the surface. So they're already pumped to hear your episode. So at this time, what we'll do is we're going to jump into the show. We're going to talk about, like you said, you and I met through Danny Covey. Danny Covey was featured in an earlier episode of the podcast. Amazing human, amazing friend, super inspirational story. So ladies and gentlemen, after you hear John's story today, if you want to be just, double engaged with the podcast, listen to Danny's story next. Amazing. But for today, when we're with you, John, I know just a touch of what Danny told me and you told me, and I'm super, super pumped. We're so pumped to hear this episode. We're doing a special recording on Saturday morning, ladies and gentlemen. I never get up on Saturday mornings, or rarely get up on Saturday mornings to do anything like this. So John's got a special story in life that God's given him and that he's going to share with you today. So John, at this time, we don't want to dwell on the past, but we want to learn from it. So let's go from your origins. Where were you born? What was your upbringing like? And then we'll just move chronologically along the way through your life. We'll stop at times and break things down. So not just what you're able to overcome or achieve, but we'll try to reverse engineer it to get the practical steps of how you did it so the audience and I can too. Sound good, my friend?
It sounds awesome, man. I love that technique to do it that way. And let me just even start off before we start off to say anything that I say here today, I take full responsibility for all my actions. I take full responsibility for everything I've done in my life. People that I've been engaged with had the tools that they had at the point they had, and I don't blame them for anything they've done. There's been people that have been in my situations that didn't act out and didn't do the nonsense that I did. But my parents were born in Italy. I was born to, my mom came from Naples, first generation American. She came over in her 20s, and my dad is from Southern Italy. And I think I'll start off with the relationship with my father. I love my dad. God bless him. He was born in 1921 during the Depression, and my dad served in 3 wars. He was in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. So my dad got married later in life to my mom. My dad got married when he was 48 to my mom, who was in her 20s. Now, the reason I said ahead of time is I don't blame anything. My dad had the tools he had for his experiences. He grew up during the Depression. His father had another family that his family was not aware of until much later. So my dad really didn't even have a father. And the anger from that relationship with his father and the betrayal sent my dad into the military at 18, where he was basically raised in the military. And the tools he gathered were not necessarily that of fatherly love, but were that of survival, of being a soldier, of being in war. And that's how he raised me. He raised me more of a soldier than he did as his son. And I don't blame him for that. He had the tools available to him that he was given. But at that point in my life, between his communication skills and my communication skills, there was a lot of conflict, and I didn't have the ability to resolve the things that were going on in my head as I was becoming a growing man. So so I had that paired with my mom, who, God bless her, my mom's still alive. She's 4'11", 5 foot of Italian energy. My man, if you come to my house, you are going to be showered with food. You're going to be showered with happiness. You're going to eat way more than you ever thought. And my mom,
and it doesn't matter if it's 2:30 in the afternoon, right?
It doesn't, brother. And I have fond memories of it being 2:30 in the morning. And my mom would be like, instead of me being out in the street, she felt much more comfortable of me being home. So my friends and I would play cards 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. My mom would wake up and be like, Goodfellas. She'd make like 10 pounds of pasta. And we'd all be sitting around eating pasta 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. But she felt, and rightfully so, that at least she knew where her son was, because I didn't have the greatest track record at that point. So I grew up in that atmosphere. And as I'm growing up, I never felt like I could ever talk to my dad. Like, I always felt fearful of my dad because of the way that I would be judged when I spoke. So I always felt in fear of my dad, and it was very difficult for me to ever express myself. I was afraid to fail, to communicate. And as I started getting older, that fear started building anger, and that anger expounded itself in my life as violence. And so I never felt like I was good enough. I've never felt like I fit in. And it started manifesting itself as violence, as testosterone built in my body as I started getting in my teen years. And that violence ended up spilling into the streets and really crafted my life as I started getting into altercations, and really created some pivotal points in my life that changed my whole life.
And as all this is happening, it's a couple things to cover. Is thankfully our podcast goes all around the world, and we have listeners from, I think I just looked, it's like 118 different countries, thousands of cities. even within the Italian culture, like I grew up, and correct me if I'm wrong, but normally men usually marry women about 10 years younger.
Mhm.
So that's like a cultural norm. But 20 years, even back then, that was a good gap, correct?
My dad was the original Hugh Hefner. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a big gap, and it was wild because sometimes kids, and I didn't know how to respond as a kid, would go, "Is that your granddad or is that your dad?" Because my dad was that much older, and my dad had seen a lot of war, but he never talked about it. He had what we know now as PTSD, but David, maybe it's a cultural thing, maybe it's a gender thing, but I think women are much more adept at expressing their emotions, especially what we may consider softer emotions like fear, like love. And my dad never expressed any of that, and he had it harbored inside. And as a kid, I didn't know how to process that. My dad would wake up in the middle of the night screaming with night terrors, and he was reliving some wartime trauma, but I didn't know what that was. I mean, we had never heard of PTSD. And so, yeah, my dad being a little bit older, number one, being born in a different generation, being born to my mom, who was married to my mom, who was much younger, was pretty wild dynamics.
And then growing up, did you have any brothers and sisters, or you the only child?
So I have two sisters. I'm the middle child. I have two sisters that are amazing. My sister Gina and Roseanne, they're both educators. I am kind of the complete opposite in a lot of senses, where they went and got their masters. I barely finished 2 years of community college. I literally got through high school because teachers did not want to see me anymore. I had dyslexia. I had no idea what dyslexia was. I just learned differently than other people. That combined with behavioral issues. And man, after 2 years of college, I was out of there. And my sisters went on to get their masters, and they're speech pathologists.
Okay. And then when you're growing up, did your mom and dad have a good relationship? Was it just we're married and that's how it is? That was the mindset. How was their relationship of interaction?
That's a great question. So, unfortunately, my dad was the general. Like, he left the military as a colonel, and that's how he ran the household. My mother, my dad has passed away, and I see my mother flourish in so many ways because she had to live in his shadow, had so much to contribute, but wasn't really allowed to contribute a lot. And she's so creative and brings so much to the table. And a lot of times my dad loved her without doubt. My dad was an awesome provider. He loved my mom, but it was his way or the highway. And so I did see conflict. I saw that. And you start taking on these traits, right? As a kid, we learn what we see, right? You can be told one thing, but if somebody's doing something else, you really absorb and learn what you see. So I did see my dad kind of running the household as a tyrant. I did see my dad stifling other people when they had input. And even though I hated a lot of those traits and it built anger in me, man, I started seeing myself doing some of the same patterns and doing some of the same things and taking on these traits, and had no way to control that or like manage any of that. Yeah.
Yeah, that learned behavior is huge. That's what I was asking. Because most of the time, even if, like you said, conscious or not, we're going to mirror that behavior, even the stuff we hated. So that's why I was wondering, because I know that might play into your story down the road.
Yeah.
So now you're born, you got two sisters, bookends, you're right in the middle, but you're the only child with an Italian mom and two sisters. So I'm guessing you were kind of doted on, right? Am I wrong?
Well, in a way, I was by my mom for sure. My mom probably overcompensated with love and everything. And my dad, just his mentality was, hey, man, girls are raised differently. He gave them a lot of leeway. And I was
Yep.
afforded pretty much zero to none leeway. I had to do a lot of things, man. And I remember one time specifically, which is crazy if I think about it in hindsight now that I have kids. My oldest sister's boyfriend had asked to borrow my dad's truck. And my sister is 2 years older now. And my dad at the dinner table said, no problem, take the truck, do it. And I had asked to borrow my dad's truck a million times, and I was never allowed. And at that moment, it hit me internally that he sees me less than somebody else that is not even a member of our family. and it hurt me, and I never couldn't say anything about it or anything, but these things started compiling to me, right? I'm like, why would he look down on me so much that I can't even borrow the truck to go fish in or take the truck out? And here's someone that's been dating my sister for a month, and he's like, yeah, go ahead and take that. So I wasn't doted on in that sense. I brought a lot of discipline actions upon myself through my own actions. And then I had a super strict dad where, dude, I had friends whose dads were known to be super strict. And my friends would go to me like, holy cow, man, your dad blows my dad out of the water in the way he talks to you and treats you. It's crazy.
Yeah, and I should have been clear. I meant by your mother and your sisters. Now, you said something, the truck scenario, I can see, and I felt and experienced things just like that. Super painful. And any listener right now hearing this, they're probably actually feeling something in their chest, right? Did you ever talk to your dad about that? Were you ever able to speak to him about that? Because I'm thinking two things. Number one, as the son, I can feel the pain. But then I'm thinking as a dad who's had children and a daughter, and I'm thinking Italian American here. So did you ever talk to him about that?
So the only time I ever talked to him about that, or a lot of our conversations would end up where emotions would stack on top of each other and it would come to a boiling point, and it was no longer a conversation. It was an explosion of emotion, and it would be something where we would be angry or yelling. And I know, in fact, that some point where I was getting disciplined over something, that I brought that out verbally, in a tirade, but we never sat down and hashed that out. We never sat down, and he never explained to me like, yeah, man, this is why I'm doing this. I'm trying to make you into a man, or whatever his reasoning was. So never, I wish I can go back in time, man. And I know that we can't, and we learn from our experiences, and we're the fabric of what our past. But I never had that conversation with him. And maybe, David, I go in the other direction too much, and I overdo things with my kids probably, and I tell them I love them too much, and I over explain things, but I never want them to feel like they can't have a conversation with me. I never want them to feel little. I always want them to feel like they have a voice, and we may disagree, but I respect their input.
Yeah. Well, one thing is, this is like, could be absolutely wrong, but thinking like a dad with a daughter, especially with that Italian American mentality, I'm thinking like, yeah, I'll be a nice guy. You can borrow my truck. But then I'm thinking, now if I find you and beat you, I just tell the cops I stole your truck. You stole my truck. So I mean, I don't know if your dad was thinking like that. So I mean, maybe it like hurt you, but he was totally on a different wavelength when he was loaning that truck out. He just wanted an excuse to beat the guy if he hurt his daughter.
He might have been double agent it. I don't know. I was definitely working on a linear level, and maybe he was taking layers deeper. I don't know.
Yeah, you know, how old are your kids now?
My kids are 12 and 9. Yeah, two
Yeah,
boys.
and you gotta say again.
Two boys.
Yeah, yeah. I'll tell you what, your mind starts rewiring as a dad as the girls get older, and is always like, oh yeah, you can borrow my truck. Be like, yeah, there's a tracker on it, you're screwed. So I mean, you never know. Maybe I'm trying to be best case scenario here. Maybe your dad didn't know how to express love, and that was his way of just kind of like, it wasn't it, he trusted the other guy more than you. He just had ulterior motives, you know. If he had a
I love
baseball
the way to
bat.
look at it like that. It's much more useful to look at it in those terms. I'm going to adopt that, whether it was true
Well,
or
we don't
not.
want to make stuff. We don't want to make stuff up, but I'll tell you firsthand, as an Italian dad who loves his daughter, she didn't understand so much of what I did or why, and maybe I communicated badly, right? But the thing is, everything I did, I can say before God, I did it because I loved her and was in her best interest, not mine. Not trying to control my outcome, what I want, just surely to protect her. So, you know, you never know. You never know. But going back to your story, so now you're in this situation and you feel this way. You feel like you're not heard. You feel like you can't talk. The conversations end up blowing up into arguments, which Italians are known for being passionate anyways. So now you're really digging in. Your dad's older than you, and you're in high school at this point, right? So between your birth and high school, is there anything we missed in your story?
I got a great work ethic early on. We lived in a small town, upstate New York, and people think New York, a lot of times they think city, but I worked on a farm as a kid. I never stopped working from probably the time I was 12, 10 years old, cutting lawns, delivering newspapers. I worked on a horse farm, shoveling horse manure, baling hay. And that for me built an insane work ethic. Like I always know that I can turn back and grind harder if I need to. And I look at those moments like working, I always go back to working in hay and doing that. There was a feeling of accomplishment I got, and it went far beyond the $5 an hour I was receiving. You would start at the beginning of the day in the dark and you'd be baling hay and filling up truckloads of hay. And at the end of the day, man, you looked at the silo or you looked at the barn and you had a fulfillment of going, all right, we just filled 25% of that whole thing. And it gave me a sense of accomplishment. And so it built an amazing work ethic. And I was decent in sports early on. And I'm now, as a parent, I'm so involved in my kids' sports and their lives, maybe to a point of fault. But I look back and I think a thing that started building resentment and anger in me too as a child is my father. I can't ever remember him coming to one sporting event I ever had. And I'd always be looking and hoping he would show up. Like as the game went on, I was a leading scorer in soccer in 8th grade and we won the title. And my parents never made it to one game. So I never got that appreciation. I never got that satisfaction of them going, great job, or we've come to be involved in your life. I don't blame them for that. My mom was still working. She had a little grocery store and a pizzeria. I don't know what my dad's reasoning was. He never explained that to me. But I also remember specifically one time in my mom's pizzeria, kids asked my dad if he can come to their football game, and he went to their football game. And I was thinking, oh my God, he never has come to any of my sporting events. He's never come to my soccer game, but he's going to see somebody else's football game. And so once again, I couldn't verbalize it. I didn't have the capacity, and that just starts building up. And then as I go from middle school to getting into high school, I lose direction. I lose like that whole sporting thing I had. I lose my drive. And that drive that had gone into athletics started going into the wrong areas. And I felt like where I was receiving success in athletics, now I didn't have that fulfillment in my life. I didn't have great grades. I didn't have great home life with my father, my relationship. And so looking back, I understand this, but at the time I didn't know. And I just started harboring anger, harboring like I was never good enough. I was a small kid, David, at freshman year in high school. I was 4'11". 4'11". All these kids had gone through puberty, and I came back and I'm like, what happened to everybody? How are they all giants? And here I was still this kid. I didn't grow until like my sophomore to junior year. So you deal with bullies. A lot of it I brought on myself by having a big mouth, whatever. You deal with the anger, being the relationship with my dad, never good enough anymore. And I started building this perfect storm of fear, resentment, and anger that now started coming to a culmination in the streets. And brother, I started getting into a lot of trouble.
And let's talk about that. And then again, I'm typing notes in my phone. This things that I just want to make sure we put in the show notes. Again, we're here to hear your story and to bring as much of your life out.
Mm-hmm.
But man, my heart, like at the same time, I don't know why. Your dad, when he went to that kid's game, that must have been crushing from the inside out. But at the same time, like as a kid, you're not thinking about anything but your own world. That's how we're born. We don't have that emotional maturity. And then if we don't have parents and people around us to help guide us through, then that's the only way we see the world. But listening to your story, it's like, oh, your dad was like, he's a businessman. He wants a pizzeria to grow. He wants to have a good face in the community. I mean, maybe he was too far where it was just like he cared about other people's opinion more than within his home, or more he's like, oh, for us to have a successful business, I got to keep the community happy. They asked me, I need to go. Do you think it was that's the only reason he went, just to keep the community happy?
I never thought about that. That's a great way to put a different light on it. I have to give that some thought and perspective and never thought about it in that way. And you are very selfish as a child, right? You're all about what is me and whatnot. So in those moments, I never thought about that. As an adult, I never thought about that. I just think my dad maybe didn't have as much awareness. And I try to be so sympathetic because I go, man, here's someone that went into war at 18 and never could ever verbalize to us what he saw. And I can only imagine my dad's later years when my dad ended up passing away of cancer. He opened up in like his last couple of years of life and he showed me photo albums of stuff that was documented, and me looking at it, not having the smell of what dead bodies are, not being there viscerally seeing this. It was horrific. I saw pictures of documentations of bodies piled on top, hundreds of bodies piled on top of each other, where they were being pushed with a bulldozer, and there was farm animals mixed in there, and that burned into my head. And I'm like, this guy is trying to process all of this. They didn't have counselors in the military back then. You probably couldn't turn to your next guy and go and explain how that hurt you or how you had to kill somebody. So I'm like, how did he process all that? And now has to shift gears, get married at 48, have kids, and lose all of that, what he experienced, and now be a tender, loving dad. So I don't know where his mind was at, but man, I can understand how there could be so many things that are impeding just your natural pulses as a human being to be caring, to show weakness, to do all of that, because he's the only one that's lived that journey that he's lived. And the little that he let in with me was horrific.
Yeah. And what was his relationship like with his father?
Well, his dad left his family
Him.
and had a whole nother family, and they found out through a third party. And so my dad's relationship with my dad was, I think, since his early teen years, he never told me this. We found this out through other people. My grandfather had a whole nother family and had kids that ended up getting arrested, and my dad ended up helping them work their way through halfway houses and stuff. So his relationship with his dad, I think, was not great. And, he turned to supporting his mom through his military paycheck. So, we are the product of what we see, learn, our environment.
Yeah. And this is your story, and I mean it. There's just something in my heart. Like, I want to say this stuff that hopefully it's helping you and our listeners around the world. Well, like we talked about generational learning and learned behavior. Your dad wasn't given the right tools, and then he grew up and he's raising you, and we're going to get into your story, how the tools you were lacking brings you to today, right? But then you were blessed and you learned them and grew. You made that conscious decision to change. But back then, man, even today still, for men, we live in a snowflake world, man, and all these people are so weak and so complaining and so making excuses. And women are like men and men are like women. It's so friggin' screwed up. But if a man does start sharing his emotions, sometimes it's like, what's wrong with you? Just toughen up,
Mm-hmm.
Like I actually overheard people the other day, the brothers, like, I don't know these people. I know it's it's actually a business contact. And I was listening to him and his friend talk about the friend's brother, right? And like, I don't know what the hell's wrong with him. Why doesn't he just snap out of it? And it's a gentleman who went to war. He's depressed and suicidal. And they're just like, what the hell's wrong with him? So even today in 2023, people are still so insensitive about the stuff that's real.
Right.
But then if you call somebody, hey, you're an idiot. Oh, that's offensive. You know what I mean? You use the wrong word, and that's like morally offensive. But yet someone like you, like your father, he sees these horrific things. Everyone's like, just walk it off. So
Right.
when it comes to your dad and the stuff you're saying, I can actually understand a lot of it. Like, I love my family and I want to do everything I can to help them, but he didn't know how to express it.
Right.
So then he's like, I got to provide. I need to have a successful business. I have to go see this kid's football games, because if not, he's going to talk bad about me. I'm going to lose business. So I have to have a good business. So I'm speculating, but I can easily see that kind of thought process. Like, your dad loves you a lot, but he doesn't really know how to be a dad. He doesn't know what to do at times. So he just does his best. And at that time, it's like, I love my family, to support my family. I go to this kid's football game. I mean, it really could have been that thought process. But on the flip side, you're like, my dad doesn't come to any of my games. He goes to a stranger's game. What the heck? And in your mind, you felt that complete devalue. So
Right.
just things to pray about, man, to try to help.
And, you know, I think all of that can be solved if we take the time and communicate, right? We got to have the skills to communicate, number one, and the confidence to do it. But when you have the skills to communicate, now you can break down all sides of that coin and understand other people's perspectives. And I feel like this is what's up with society today. I always try now, as 51-year-old John Petrelli, to understand the other side of the table and get some perspective. Because at the end of the day, honestly, David, I feel like we all want the same things. We all want love. We want to be loved. We want to give love. We want to contribute. And these things get lost when people refuse to communicate or be empathetic about somebody else's perspective.
Yep.
So I come back.
And you have
Go ahead.
zero response. I'm not ever saying as a child you weren't right, because no child has those tools. Those are tools we're taught and learned.
Right.
But your dad was just denied that learning too. So it's great that you have now and you're teaching people. So bring us in your story, John. Like, so now you're in high school.
I'm in high school. I have a growth spurt. It's a freak of nature. My dad's only 5'8". My mom's 5 foot max. I go to 6 foot. I had all these years of being bullied on and everything. And I had this anger building. So now I start hitting the weight room and I'm like, part of me is like, man, I'm going to get revenge on these people that picked on me. Part of me is coming into my own with testosterone. Part of it's just stupid, you know, choices. And I start getting into confrontations in the street, physical fights. And what happens is crazy, because now I start getting an identity of being someone that is known for fighting, that is known for being tough. And that brings me love and it brings me satisfaction. And it's something that I've been missing. And now I start feeding upon that. So when I see people giving me accolades for, even if I lost a fight, of being physical, it makes me want to do that again. And I get into this vicious cycle where every weekend with my friends, we are getting into some type of fight. We're getting into a confrontation. Sometimes we don't even know what it's about. Somebody is like, hey, can you help us out? And because I'm now building this identity and receiving love from that identity, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, man. Here I am in the streets. People are getting injured. We have to go to court. Someone's got hurt. And it all leads to this culmination. And there are many, many incidents, and I'm living in violence all the time, to the point where in my stomach, in the pit of my soul, brother, I have butterflies and anxiety all the time, because I know in my heart what I should be doing, and I know what my actions are, and they don't correlate. I got into martial arts when I was 12 years old. We're supposed to be honorable. We're supposed to know how to protect other people. We're supposed to be righteous. And here I am getting in fights and now training to be someone that's good. And I have this turmoil in my stomach. I also get love from my friends for being in here. I get identity. And it all culminates through many, many confrontations and ridiculousness. But after my senior year, when we all get out of school, I grew up, the town I'm in is Utica, New York. And they have a thing called Fireworks Over Utica. It's right after we got out of school. And there's hundreds of people in the street. There's a firework display. And at that time, there was a thing going on, which was horrible. It was called wilding, where kids would just mob and attack innocent people for no reason. If you Google that, you can look. It happened in the 90s, wilding. It was maybe a New York thing. And I never did that. But this was like the pulse of the area and the energy. And so we go to this thing, Fireworks Over Utica. We're supposed to go and get drunk after. Everybody's getting ready to go to college. My friends have much better choices than I do. I'm going to the only 2-year college that will accept me. And we get into a confrontation in the parking lot, a gas station parking lot. And I make a pivotal choice in my life that changes the trajectory of my life for the rest of my life. A guy squares up with my friend, and without thinking, they're going to fight. I push my friend out of the way, and I kick this individual square in the face. And he crashes to the ground, and the back of his head collides with the curb, and he cracks his head open. And he's unconscious, and his teeth are knocked out, and he's bloody laying on the ground. And for a brief moment, I'm proud of myself. And I'm sitting there, and my friends are cheering me on. And all of a sudden I feel somebody grab me from behind. And he, at the time, had another individual with him, and it turns out to be his brother. I didn't know till this whole thing went to court and everything shook out. And I think his brother's grabbing me, and I turn around to basically, defend myself, attack that individual. And it's an undercover police officer that saw me kick this guy in the face, and he's putting a handcuff on me. And I swing without even thinking, and here I am now trying to strike a police officer. And so in a fraction of a second, I go to possibly killing someone that, brings back a lot of shame and emotion for me. But I didn't, in a split second, I go from potentially having a future to taking away someone's future. Selfishly, at my point in that life, all I could think about is taking my future away. And then striking the cop. I get slammed to the ground. I have no idea. I'm trying to process what's going on. I get handcuffed and I get thrown into a cop car. And now the person is on the ground, knocked out. There's a pool of blood on the ground, and the police officers are doing the best they can to revive this individual. And now his brother comes on the scene and sees his younger brother knocked out on the ground, unconscious, and freaks out and starts attacking my friends. He gets arrested. They put us both in the same cop car. Now, imagine that. Right?
This is the 90s, right? This is the 90s or 80s?
This is the 90s, 1990, 1991. And so now this individual sees his brother who may be dead on the streets. The person who attacked him is in the car with him. I'm sitting there. All I can think of, my world is now down to these four walls of the police car. And all I can think about is I had been thinking and manifesting in my head that I was going to end up in jail or dead. And I had been processing that for the last several years with all this anger and these fights. And now what I had been thinking in my head is coming to fruition right in front of me. All the thoughts, and I'm like, I knew I was going to end up in jail. I knew I was going to end up hurting someone. They ended up taking me out of the cop car. They put us in a paddy wagon, which, for lack of a better word, is a police van, a big police van. They have now riot police out there trying to clear the streets. There's hundreds of people around. They're trying to revive this individual on the street unsuccessfully. The fire department comes. They're working on him. They can't revive him. And now the ambulance comes. They whisked me away, okay, with his brother in the back of a paddy wagon. And all I remember is this person is still unconscious on the streets. I'm going to jail. And I wish I could tell you my focus at that point in my life was, I hope this person makes it. My focus at that point in my life was, what has happened to my life right now? I saw this happening and I brought it to reality. And so they bring me to jail. I have to get processed. Police officers do not take kindly to individuals, especially 20-year-old punks striking other police officers. And I have to work my way through the court system and everything that entails. And now when my friends are going off to college, I have this cloud hanging over me of having to work this through. But it brought me to some great bottoms in my life. And I don't want people to think that you have to hit your bottom to make these decisions. But I started realizing, number one, I had to change my geography because I was going to end up in jail or dead. I'm already arrested. And I had to change my peer group. And I'm not blaming my friends, because a lot of people that maybe in this situation didn't do what I did, but I was not strong enough as an individual to handle the dynamics of the relationships and not have it come out in a negative context. So I said, I got to change my peer group and I got to change my geography. And I wish I could tell you, David, that at this point I changed my whole life, but it took some more happening for me to hit absolute rock bottom. But for the first time in my life, I went to college while I was dealing with this, and I finally got good grades. I started isolating myself. I buried myself in the weight room. And I started separating myself from my peer group and my friends who I loved dearly. And I was torn between my loyalty to them and my future. And so I started studying. I started burying myself in the weight room hour upon hour. I started dedicating myself to bodybuilding and weight training. And that was a pivotal point in my life. But there were several confrontations that happened after that. One of them involving a chainsaw, which is absolutely crazy. And it's in my book and makes me, I tell people, we literally had a chainsaw in the streets in a confrontation. And whenever I hear a chainsaw, I go to two places in my life: the movie Scarface and outside of the Network nightclub in December in upstate New York. And then my last confrontation I had, we got into a fight with a known street thug. And at the end of that fight, he said, "I'm going to kill you." And he was known for carrying a gun. And I said, "What the am I doing?" And after that confrontation happened, I called a friend of mine. It was the only options I had. A friend of mine lived in California, and I had $500 to my name. And I called my friend Daryl Hagan, who offered me a shed of light at that point in my life where I didn't have many options. And I said, "Daryl, my brother, I'm going to die out here, and I need to change and move somewhere." And he didn't have any room where he was staying at his uncle's house, but he offered me to sleep on the floor. He said, "I don't have any rooms out here, but my uncle Jimmy, Jimmy Treen, changed my life, offered me to sleep on the floor of their house." And in 2 weeks, I packed my bags. I had $500 to my name. I bought an airline ticket, and my parents took me to the airport, not knowing. I never had conversation about chainsaws. I never had conversation about someone pulling a gun. They knew I was in different trouble, but they didn't know the extent. And bro, that is the first time when my dad took me to the airport at 20, 21 years old that my dad ever told me he loved me. And it crushed my soul. And that was the first time he ever called me son. And he wished me well at the airport and gave me a hug and said, "I love you, son." And I packed my bags and I headed off to California to hopefully change my life. And it did change my life. I mean, from that point on, I could tell you that my trajectory of my life changed from harming people, from being selfish, to bringing violence, to focusing on helping people, to being outside of myself. I became a trainer when there was only one trainer test. I became a fitness trainer when there was only one test for training in the whole United States. I took that test on the hopes that I would help people. And what I found out was, as I went on this journey, those people really helped me more than I helped them. And I went on to being one of the most successful trainers in the nation, working with A-list celebrities and going on international tours and doing things that I never would have thought were possible, were beyond the scope of my mental abilities. And I would have been ashamed and embarrassed to verbalize in my teen years because I was afraid of what other people would have thought, but became possible because I came outside of myself and my selfish needs and started focusing on how do I help other people? How do I make other people better? That is the longest, David, I've gone without ever taking a breath. And I'm glad you could be part of that. I know that's a big chunk, but that is literally my trajectory from my teen years to me becoming a trainer.
Beautiful. And thank you for sharing that. Now, to tie up some loose ends in the listeners' minds and mine, the young man that you kicked in the head, obviously you didn't go to prison, so I'm guessing he lived. What was how did that turn out?
Yeah, so when I think about, we all have a history and we all have our reasons for doing or not doing something. And let me just say that after, as an adult, when I did investigation of who these guys really were, they had way more excuse to act inappropriately than I did. They grew up in abusive households. They had addiction in their family. They had addiction in their life. And so, by the grace of God, I literally feel like God has been guiding my life. And even the worst parts of my life that I believe, were horrific have taught me the most, have helped me the most. So the two guys that we got into a fight with were brothers, and they had just gotten out of prison that night. They got out of jail and prison that night, and we ran into them. And it's hard for me to say this, but for the sake of 19-year-old John Petrelli, I was lucky in that sense because the legal system had a hard-on for them. And in return for testifying against them, because there's a whole bunch that I didn't cover in details, this kid kicked my car, his brother kicked my car door in, and there's a chunk of it that I didn't get into that happened right prior to me kicking him. And the police officers and the DA in accordance with testifying against them, literally gave me the easiest sentence ever. I got released on ROR, which is called released on your own recognizance. I didn't even have to post bail. In return for testifying them, they dropped my charges to a conditional and a violation. And with the condition being if I got arrested again within 12 months, that they could reenact all the initial charges. So I was supposed to be good for a year, even though I wasn't. It was always in the back of my mind. And that individual recovered. And I've heard, this is not first-hand knowledge, but I've heard through other parties that they ended up living a life in and out of jail. I believe one of the brothers has passed away now. I could be wrong on that. But, man, if we grew up in the same neighborhood, we would have probably been best friends. And like I say, they lived through that. He ended up living. I don't know all the physical trauma that he had ended up going through. I don't know what medical things he had ended up going through, but they had more reason to be a degenerate than I ever did. And I am sorry for what happened. I had shame and still do for many, many years about that. And I just asked for forgiveness and I apologize. So that is the extent of what I know happened to them.
And that brings up a good point, John. And if I ever go too deep, then you want to stop. Be like, nope, just tell me. But you're clearly emotional now in a good way. Like, you don't like what you did, but you understand that's part of your past, and you're sharing and you're talking about it. So I know you're connecting with a lot of people all over the world right now who have things in their past that they're not proud of, or they're like, yeah, I wish I could do this differently, but we can't. So to those people with you right now that are struggling, how did you, and maybe you're still working through it, but what's a starting point for them to start working through the pain, to start getting free?
For me, and it took many years, but I can say this now, is listen, I had given those guys, and this may seem so egotistical, but I had given them forgiveness many, many years ago for what they had done and their part in it. And obviously, but I had to be as kind to myself and give myself forgiveness. Sometimes we are kinder to other people than we are to ourselves. And there's still obviously grains of shame in there. But I've come to realize through my journey that I can help other people that may be in a similar situation, to know that you are not defined by one moment in your life. You are not defined by your failures, and you're not defined by your successes. When we look back at my life, I hope that people can look at the scope of my life and go, yes, here's an individual that made some mistakes. Yes, here's an individual that made some bad choices. But at the end of that, they grew from those choices and they made a better place. They made a society better. They became a better person. So all I can say is you are not defined by one moment unless you choose to be defined by that singular moment. And we can only project the present and the future. So I've learned so much from that. and I share it with you here in my healing, but also hopefully in the helps of helping someone else work through their healing process.
Thank you. That was excellent. And ladies and gentlemen, in the show notes, we always have our contact info, our guest contact info. John has a new book, which we'll talk about at the end, but continue the conversation, whether it's with John or whether it's with a counselor or whether, someone to help you. Reach out to us. We'll try to help you connect if you need help, because letting go and getting past that just guilt and shame, God brings conviction. That's healthy. Satan wants to keep guilt and shame on you to ruin any future you have. So, John, I think that's beautiful. You said, one moment, good or bad, doesn't define our life. It's not done till we take our last breath. So thank you for sharing that, brother. But let's switch gears a little bit. Now, you land in California, your dad says, "I love you, son." Whether he knew something was going on, he was looking for closure, whether it was a rite of passage, like, man, you're going on your own, I'm proud of you. He has a hard time expressing himself, but you land in California, and there's wisdom in separating ourselves from peers in bad situation. But most of the time when people separate, it's almost like a form of running, and their problems just follow them and get worse. Now, you took the right path and you made it happen, and with God. But what are the things you did? Take us through your story from when you landed in California to today, and what those forks in the road were, those choices, because you could have so easily fell back into the same life in California or worse, but somehow you navigated through it. So what did your journey look like, and what were those forks in the road choices that kept you on the good path?
Yeah, and I wish I could tell you that I always made the right choices, right? But I didn't. By the grace of God, I was guided through. So I still made mistakes. I still make mistakes to this day. But I remember the flight, bro. Just the flight of flying. There was a bag of bricks that I was able to drop just on the flight to California and heading there. And I didn't have to hold up this image anymore. I could start a new life. I didn't have to hold up this persona of being a tough guy and meeting other people's expectations of what they thought of me and always living on the edge into to the next fight. That started dropping. And I got picked up at the airport, and I remember seeing California, and I was like, my God, this is the land of opportunity. I went and I stayed. Man, Jimmy Treen is a person, he's passed away now, and thank God for him. It's the house I stayed at, and he was working his way through AA. And he was giving back to other individuals that were working their way through the process. And even though I never had a drug addiction, I had a violence addiction. And so we would have all these characters coming through the house of people he was helping. We had a guy that lived underneath our dining room table for a while. His name was Curtis, and we called it Curtis Corner. And he had gotten out of jail for manslaughter and had a meth addiction. And Jimmy saw amazing things in him and looked beyond the rough exterior and paid to have all his dental work done, paid to got him a job. He was on the path of helping people and giving them a new future. And now, instead of me seeing violence all the time, instead of me trying to hold up this persona, unbeknownst to me on a different level, I start seeing love. I start seeing caring. I start seeing compassion. And it takes a while, but I start absorbing these traits. So it wasn't easy. I get to California. I'm determined to be a success. I start working landscape jobs he had a construction company. I was working landscape jobs, digging ditches, going house to house. I'm doing a bouncing job on the side while I study to be a trainer. And God tests me several times. Number one is I get E. coli poisoning. And I had only been in California a couple months, and I get E. coli poisoning, and I almost die. I get infected from eating some bad meat. I go to the hospital. It's a horrendous situation. So I drain my bank account of the little money I had. I got medical bills, and that's a test. Then as soon as I get done with getting E. coli poisoning, a water truck goes through an intersection, and the only new car I've ever had in my life, I have, and it gets totaled by a water truck and I'm laid up. And I remember specifically, this is a pivotal moment for me where I crossed from boyhood to manhood, because my mother, God bless her, and my sister Gina both mail me checks for what is a huge amount at that point in my life. One was for 500 and one was for 300. And I still have those checks to this day, because I said at 21 years old, if I cannot make it out here on my own, I don't deserve to be here. And I'm being put through a test. And even though that money was life-changing for me, and maybe it was, I'm not saying everybody should do this, maybe it was my ego, but I took those checks, I put them right back in the envelope they came, and I saved them. And so that was a huge test, getting hit by a water truck, getting E. coli, and I just kept struggling forward, man. I was working at night. I finally took a test to become a trainer. It's probably the first test I ever passed since 6th grade, but I passed that test. And I start my own business. I literally start my own business, and I have flyers made, and I pay kids in the neighborhood to pass out my flyer in grocery parking lots, and like parking lots, business parking lots. And bro, my God was watching over me, because my phone starts ringing that day. And I don't even have the answers for people. Like, how much do you charge? Where are you trained? And I'm so embarrassed that I'm so young as a trainer that I disguise my voice and talk older when people are calling for training, because I don't want them to know that I'm 21 years old and just started. So in my mind, my craziness, I'm like, if I talk deeper, yes, how can I help you? And so my phone starts blowing up off the hook. I get my first client, $12 an hour, an amazing girl that has her own incredible journey. I charge her $12 an hour, which is $5 more an hour than my last job in New York, which I was catching shoplifters in New York for Bradley's department store while I was in college. And I had a gun pulled on me. I had to choke someone unconscious and enter my perils. I had a knife pulled on me, and I was getting $7.25 an hour. So now I'm getting 12 bucks an hour. I couldn't be more excited. I'm helping people, and that graduates to 15. It graduates to helping more people. Somebody wants to be able to walk the aisle at their son's wedding, and they have no mobility, and they're 80 years old. I help that person. Another person I help get ready for this, or another person I help, get ready for their high school reunion. And as I'm working with these people and helping these people, they are healing my mind, my body, and my soul. And the more people I help, the better I feel. And I start shedding the BS of who my identity was in New York, who I was supposed to be. And now I come into my real passion of helping people, my real passion of seeing people on their journey and coming into their life and going on this with them. And I mean, it starts all falling into place, and it becomes not easy, but easier. And I still got to put in long hours, and I still got to study, and I still got to work my butt off. But now I'm happy. I'm working in a capacity where I'm happy, and that becomes infectious, and it becomes contagious. And now the people in my life that are coming into my life, either through work or new friendship or business, whatever it is, are happier. And they have things to offer that I didn't have before. And I now have something to offer in return. And now you start becoming what you surround yourself with. And I start becoming from this adolescent, violent individual to a man that is focused on really listening to what people's needs are, trying to solve the equation and craft a way to get them to their goals and to make them healthier. And that's my path, brother. For me, going into training, it's crazy. There's a million details in there, but I go from that $12 an hour first client to working on movie sets and getting asked to travel internationally. And it's bananas. But I literally tell people, and hopefully we'll cover this, that if I can do that as an 18-year-old, 20-year-old degenerate with dyslexia and problems with the legal system and all these problems, imagine what you can do as an individual. Imagine the greatness you can achieve. Imagine what you can do to help other people and the people's lives you can affect with positivity. If I can do that, you can clearly do more.
Well said. enthusiasm breeds enthusiasm, love breeds love, negativity breeds negativity, but hope breeds hope. So very true, John.
Yeah,
So
brother.
let me, before we transition into today, I mean, that's amazing how God had you on that journey and how you were putting the work in. But going back to when you were in California,
Mm-hmm.
two things. Number one, you said the gentleman you were staying with was in AA.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been through, I'm not this, hold on, how do I say this? I'm not saying this like, oh, I got a degree, but I got a degree. I got a master's degree. And part of the master's degree is we had to go to a bunch of different classes and group meetings to understand them. And man, I went through about 8 weeks of AA meetings and they were fantastic. And because, growing up, you heard some people say AA is fantastic. Some people say, oh, AA is terrible. You have people who either for it or against it. But I went through like 8 weeks of the program only, and it was great. I mean, I thought it was excellent content that everybody can use. You may not be addicted to alcohol, you may not be addicted to drugs, but we all have vices, and it's the same principles for everything. So I thought AA was a fantastic program. But when you were living with that gentleman and he knew you had a history of violence, did you say you became a bouncer in California?
I did. I worked when I first got there. I got a job on weekends being a bouncer. Yeah, that's where I met my
Yeah.
wife.
Okay, so that like blows my mind. That's like it's like saying if I'm an alcoholic, go be a bartender. Like how the hell did you get through that safely and not get re-addicted?
Yeah, I have. It's crazy, man. This is maybe some people don't understand this. For me, there is a level of comfort in physical contact and physical confrontation that is so true. You have to be present. If you've ever done jujitsu or boxing or whatever, that you have to be present. You got to be here. You got to be now. And for me, the moments preceding it were the anxiety. Like, are we going to do this? Am I going to get into this fight? What's going to go on here? And the release valve was actually the confrontation. That I can handle, win, lose, or draw, I can handle, but it was the stuff preceding that. So I felt, I'm still in this mindset of I haven't shed young John Petrelli yet. I need to make a living. I feel very comfortable being in a physical confrontation. And how do I get, monetary compensation for that? How can I make a possible living? But I gave myself a timeline. I said, I can do this while I'm studying to be a trainer, and I will give this 6 months max. And I knew there was an end game to it. So I utilized some of my stuff in the past. And for once, I was just breaking up the fights. I wasn't usually the focus of the fight. There was a fight going on, and now I'm trying to separate this. You know what it also did to me? It gave me such perspective on the things that we do when we are in an altered negative state. And that for me was watching people had drank way too much and the things that they would do and regret later. And I can see shades of myself in the past if I would drink and go out and do shit or, and I'd be embarrassed about. And so a lot of these people weren't even aware of their actions. And I was the only sober eyes in the place. Right? Everybody else is in an altered state. They have their focuses on picking something up or drinking more or whatever. So somehow, some way I made it through there. And I gave myself 6 months. I think I got out of there before 6 months. And it also stamped the fact that that was something I didn't want to do anymore. It put a finishing stamp on that to be like, man, I don't want to be in bars. I don't want to be around people that are acting crazy. I don't want to be in this. It ignites a part of me that I'm not happy with. And so it was my final, no one's ever asked me that. It was my final time. It's a great question.
Well, yeah, because there's so many people listening to this podcast and they're trying to get out of this situation. And in my mind, that's like, I would never give that advice. Yeah, go be a bouncer at a club, I mean, I would never give advice. Like even thinking now, if you separate yourself and you're just talking to a 20-year-old kid, he's on parole, he's got a history of violence, he's trying to start a new life, would you ever advise him to get a job as a bouncer?
Hell no. No.
Exactly. So that's why it's a miracle that it worked for you.
Yeah.
But my mind is trying to process. And what you said is true. You saw the light. You saw, wow, that's dark. I can't believe I acted like that asshole. You saw these things, but what made you the one out of the 100 that didn't fall back into it? What made you that one? Like, in your mind, you made a decision that I'm only going to do it for this long. I don't want this anymore. And it's a means to a different end. What in your mind, in your heart, what did God put in your life that kept you on that straight and narrow? Because, John, you and I know most people who went back to that situation, they're just going to go right back to a worse situation. So
Right.
how did you navigate and come out different?
Yes. So I never forgot the feeling of what it was like to be ashamed. I never forgot what it was like when I look in the mirror and not like myself or who I am. I never forgot all the nonsense and violence I had done. And I didn't ever want to go back to that. That's how I had a memory of that. So maybe that shame that I carried helped me through that. And God wasn't ready for me to dump that right there and just go, hey man, here's a reminder. And I hadn't thought about this, but I had a thing happen to me in like my first week of bouncing. There was a Native American tribe that was in the town that I went to, Temecula. It's called the Pechanga Indians. And I'd never been around Native American people, let alone having a tribe right there. And there were two guys that was the first fight I broke up, were both Native American guys. And once I broke them up, right, they were absolutely inebriated. And I said to him, listen, why are you guys fighting each other? Think about this. There are such a small population of Native Americans left, and you guys are fighting each other. Does this not seem crazy to you? And I probably never penetrated them, and they probably never thought more about it, but it penetrated my mind and go, look at the ridiculousness of what we do when we're in this altered negative state of mind. Here's two Native Americans fighting each other. And meanwhile, as a community, they've had so many struggles and fights. You don't need this fight. You should be helping each other. You should be bonding together. And somehow, some way that struck me. It was the first fight that I had to break up. And man, it hit me in my soul to see these guys. And I felt pain for them. And yeah, I was just blessed, man. I just feel like there is a larger power guiding my life, because there's so many places I can look where I should have not lived. There's so many points in my life we go through, and if you read my book, you'll see where I should have died. And it doesn't end in the streets of New York, and it's crazy. Or I came out the way I did, and I just feel like there's been a higher power guiding me to be able to go, man, no, you have more to do. You have a voice to help people.
Amen. Yeah, and that is so true when you're talking about, like, I was laughing about Native Americans because they're strong. Like, these guys, I mean, I don't know if you remember back then, but like, Samoans, there's just a different level of strength.
Different breed, bro.
Yeah, Native. I remember like my friends in college and we play like tackle football, and you get hit by even the biggest guy. It's like no big deal. My friends from American Samoa would hit me, and I'm like, I got homework to do. I'm like, it's just not worth it. I'm not getting a scholarship for this. It's like, not like you can't take it, but why take it? It's like, yeah,
Right.
you hit hard, but American Indians are tough bastards too. So,
Yep.
man, that's great. Yeah, there's just still like, and again, it can just be God gives us all free will. He loves every human on the planet, but he knows also that not everybody's going to make the right choices. And I'm just trying to, I don't want to delay your story or stretch out the podcast and for you listening, maybe right into me or John, but I'm just trying to figure out how you can walk into the worst possible scenario and still make good decisions. Because Satan's going to do everything. Satan has two objectives in life. One is to keep us from trusting Christ. And two, once we've trusted Christ, to ruin our life for him. So we have a terrible testimony and nobody else is like, why should I listen to blank? Because his life's a mess, So, okay. So, but you go through, you start handing out flyers. And when you said your phone's ringing, this was before cell phones, right? Or did you have a cell phone
machine? Yeah.
Yeah.
I came home from my landscaping job and people are calling me for training on the answer machine. I almost fell over. And
Yeah.
I didn't even know, like, the only people that had my number at that point were my family in New York. And I was so poor at this point that this is before your time, but we had MCI, AT&T, Pac-Bell. It was all like you paid for local calling nationwide. I used to have to call on nights and weekends when it was like 25 cents a minute.
Yeah,
And
you
I
had
used to
calling cards and stuff.
calling card. I had an MCA calling card, and I even learned one from the people that were in the house with me that were working their way through AA. A lot of people would be calling the house who were going to get out of prison and hadn't gotten out of prison yet, and Jimmy would give them a place to live. And so they would call and go, you have like 30 seconds to say something, and it'd say, do you accept a collect call from? And instead of saying their name, they would go, hey, this is Randy, I'm in jail right now, can you please call me back at this number? So I'm like, how do I use that to talk to my family? So I would make a collect call to my family, and it goes, do you accept a collect call from? And I'm like, hey, it's John, I'm in California, can you call me right away? And then my family would call me back. So I stole that idea from that. But yeah, that's where we were at that time. I would get a message on my answer machine, and I would start calling people back. And man, somebody took a shot on me, and they met with me. And before you knew it, I was working 3 jobs. I had the landscaping, I still had the bouncing, and then I started doing training, and then bouncing phased out. And then before you know it, within 3 months, I was training people full time. It just skyrocketed. I went from one to the next. I helped this person. They became a huge billboard for me. Nothing's better advertisement than someone that is happy with your service, right? And now they're walking around telling everybody. Before you know it, I'm working full time as a trainer, and my life is immersed in trying to find better ways to be a better trainer and help people. And I stopped going door to door doing sales for landscaping. I stopped digging ditches, and my life is full-time training.
Beautiful. Now, you met your wife, you said, while you were bouncing?
Yeah, so unbeknownst to me, bro, whatever I do, I take seriously. My wife tried to come into the bar. She didn't have an ID. I kicked her out of the bar, and I didn't even know. And she knew this, and I didn't know. I was working the front door. So, and then on my birthday, the only guy I knew in town, other than the people I was living with, was another bouncer. His name's Rick Chad, great guy. And so he takes me out for my birthday. We have the night off from bouncing. And so what do we do? When you bounce at a nightclub, what do you do on your day off, your only day off? You go to another nightclub in a town next door. So I go there, and there's a whole section, and we could get into this if you want, but I had aspirations of getting into acting. And I understand it now because I wanted approval from my father. So they happen to be shooting a movie in that town, and they're having auditions at this pub, like nightclub, Irish pub. And so I have the great idea that I'm going to audition for the movie. Now, the only acting experience I have, bro, is my 3rd grade play where I played a groundhog on Days of the Year, and I had 2 lines and I blew both of them. So I go and I audition for this thing. And one of my favorite movies of all time that I know every line to is the movie The Last Dragon. Not Enter the Dragon with Bruce Lee, but The Last Dragon with Bruce Leroy and Shonuff. And so they have this thing where they're going to shoot this movie in this town, and the auditions, and now having been through the entertainment industry, I understand how crazy this was now in hindsight, but they had the audition on the dance floor, and they had you perform it in front of everybody in the bar. So I rope my buddy into doing this. I give him like 2 lines to pitch at me, and I go on this tirade of doing this Shonuff audition in front of all these people. And listen, they have a sign-up sheet in the bar, and I go to the guy, and I go, I'd like to sign up for the auditions. And he goes, okay, you have to do a monologue. I don't know what a monologue is. I have no idea. He goes, does your monologue? I go, okay, I'm ready. He goes, is your monologue comedic or dramatic? And I go, yes. And he goes, which one is it? And I don't even have an answer. I go, both. And he goes, okay. So he puts me on the sheet, I get to see these couple people auditioning beforehand. I got like 10 minutes to get my mind right. And I go up there and perform this scene from The Last Dragon, this pivotal scene with Shonuff. And either my half of psychotic ability and whatever, but my wife sees this and somehow is swept off her feet. And she's in that nightclub and comes over to talk to me after. And that's where I meet my wife. In fact, she had a friend that was way too aggressive and was into me, put her hand in my back pocket of my jean. And I told my one buddy I know, I go, you got to run some interference because I would like to talk to this other girl. And this girl has got to get out of my face. And that's where I met my wife. So maybe I went to the club to bounce because I was going to have a night off. And that's how I meet my wife. I don't know, bro. But that's how I end up meeting my wife. And it actually sets me on a journey where I get into down the road. I start studying acting in addition to being a trainer. And I go to Hollywood to train, and I put my hat into the ring of acting and become quite successful out the gate and end up being on soap operas. I end up being on TV shows. I end up doing movies. There's a whole crazy part of my life where I'm training and acting. And it once again just goes that you can do anything literally if you put your mind to it. You want me to get into that or no? It's kind of crazy, but it's up to you, man.
No, man, share it. Like anything that we can learn and grow from, absolutely. Because you go to this audition, you go out one night, you go to an audition, you meet who becomes your wife, and then you go start acting to pursue a dream you had and you never really expressed. And then while you're there, I'm guessing it's probably feeding into your coaching business too. It's like, even if acting doesn't work out, I'm getting coaching jobs. And then, hey, look at this, the acting is working out. So yeah, talk about it, brother.
It's crazy, right? So I had, and I never could verbalize because I didn't have the confidence. I'd always thought about getting into acting. In hindsight, I know I was trying to get my dad's approval. I'm like, if I'm on TV, there's no way. My dad might not be able to come to my soccer game, but if I'm on TV, he's got to see me on TV. But I didn't have that consciousness to think of it then. So I never verbalized to any of my friends because here's a tough guy. Why would you want to act, right? It's ridiculous. Don't talk to me about that. Maybe they wouldn't have said that, but in my head, that's what I'm saying. So now I start training people. I get very successful in training. I have full time. I start driving to San Diego after my work to study acting. And I get an acting coach and I start putting in time to learn about the craft of it, to learn about all this. And so I do 6 months, a year of training, whatever. Then I finally go and submit to agencies, and I get a small agency that will take a shot on me. And they start sending me on auditions. And listen, I am no Marlon Brando by any means, but I'm just good looking enough, physical enough, or whatever, a combination of enough things that can get me in the door, right? Just a little bit enough talent, just a little bit good looking enough, just a little bit has a physical body. And I start blowing all these auditions, and in the car on the way to the audition, I'm amazing. Like I can knock it out of the park. I'm practicing to the steering wheel. I'm practicing to the window. The people driving beside me, I'm sure think I'm schizophrenic, but I can do the 2 lines in the car for patrol officer number 2, like nobody's business. And then I get into the casting director and I shit the bed and I'm nervous and everything. But eventually, through perseverance, through training, I start landing little roles. I do 2 lines on a TV show. I start doing this modeling thing. I do 2 lines on a movie. I get into the Screen Actors Guild. So I moved from Southern California near San Diego to Hollywood to do my combination of dreams. And in the daytime, I'm doing a job I love. I love training people. I love helping people. This is amazing. I'm getting paid for it. And in the evening, I'm studying acting. So I moved to Hollywood. I get an agent that takes a shot on me out there. They submit my photos. Back in the day, they used to pass photos out. They had a courier that would bring it to the studio. A casting director would put out a notification. I'm looking for an Italian guy for mobster scene number 3. And they would get 1,000 pictures and they would whittle it down, call 100 people in. Then they would have an audition and narrow it down to 10 and they go see producers. And then you're 1 out of 1,000, you make it. So in my mind, I go, how do I become an asset to my agency? And I offer them to deliver all their packages for free. I said, I'm going to take your courier costs out. I know my picture is in that packet. I'm going to go deliver that and all the other packets you have. And so now I start getting on the backlots of Paramount. I start getting on all the movie studios and I start learning what's going on. I'm watching. This is before 9/11, where all you needed was a courier shirt to get through the gate. And so now I start learning. I get asked to do auditions on the spot because they're casting someone that looks just like me. I go in dressed as the part and I start getting parts. I get on Days of Our Lives. That's where I meet Sebastian Maniscalco, who ends up being a dear friend of mine for 20 years. He's one of the biggest comedians, A-list actor in the world right now. We meet on Days of Our Lives. I start doing all the different soap operas, and I get to a point where I have a good amount of success, but I never was passionate about it like I thought I would be. I never got fulfillment like I did from helping people. I was the Dolce & Gabbana guy with Giselle. They hired me. I was international on every billboard in the nation. You look at it, you see, you go, oh, that guy, yeah, he had dark hair then, whatever. It's when I had dark hair, I was handsome, whatever. I end up doing all of that. They pay me an extraordinary amount of money to do this stuff compared to the guy that was getting $7.25 catching shoplifters. But I never got the fulfillment I got from training. I never got the satisfaction. I describe it for me, and it could be different for someone else, but as being like a Easter bunny that you get on Easter. It's all shiny and chocolatey on the outside, but on the inside, it's hollow. And that's how it started feeling for me. I end up having kids, and I find myself in an audition, and I look around, and there's 25 guys that look just like me, and I'm like, man, I just don't have the passion for this anymore. Helping people and training is where my heart is. And right now I could be with my family, and I make a decision after several years of doing acting that I want to dedicate myself and my life to training and helping people. It's where I get the most fulfillment. And I make a decision in that audition. And on the way home, I call my agency and I say, thank you so much for taking a shot on me. You helped me when no one else would help me. We've had a good amount of success. I want to send the office over lunch for everybody. I thank you so much for getting me in this world, but now it's time for me to retire from there. I want to focus wholeheartedly on training. And they say, are you sure? 100%. I send them over lunch. My brother, within the next week, I get a call. I'm on the 405 freeway stuck in traffic. This whole time I'm in entertainment business, I had to scratch and claw for everything I got. I get a call from a director I worked with twice. They call my agency and they offer me a part in a miniseries with no audition, guaranteed months work, shooting in San Diego, great pay. And I look up at the sky and I know God is testing me. He's going to me. He's going, you said that this is what you really wanted, to only train people, but we're going to find out. And I take in everything my agency is telling me. They're like, this is your day rate. This is how many days you're going to work. All you have to do is show up to set. And I tell them, thank you so much for the opportunity. I know this is going to be money out of your pocket, but I cannot accept this. If you had called me last week, there wouldn't have been better news. But I've made my decision and I've come to peace with it. And I have so much fulfillment from helping people that no amount of money you're going to offer me right now is going to change my mind. And I turned down the only role I was offered without auditioning. And I walk away from the entertainment industry with some fond memories, with a lot of life lessons, and really a definitive knowing of what my purpose is in helping people. And that is there's a lot more details, but that is my broad brushstroke of me going from a farm town, mucking hay stalls, mucking horse barns, baling hay, getting arrested, deciding to make a change in my life and learning from my mistakes, to helping people as a trainer, to going through and having this dream of trying Hollywood and doing it to coming back out the other side. And once again, if I can do that, imagine what you can do if you're willing to take a shot on yourself and put the work in.
Yeah, that's amazing. And then knowing your passion, knowing what was fulfilling, knowing who you really were, that was the key to staying steadfast in your decision, correct?
Yes, it was. Correct.
And you're kind of listening and hearing the voice of God and you're following him and what was your daily like obviously you came to that decision, but the hundreds of days up to that point, was this rolling around in the back of your head? Were you too busy to realize it? Were you being like, God, what should I be doing? Was it building along the way?
Building as my kids were born. And my family to me is everything, man. They're my why. They're right up there. God and my family are my whys. And I was missing out on time with them to be in an audition, to be on a set. And I'm like, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? I don't need anybody's approval. I love my family dearly. And why am I not spending time with them? And it just came to that culmination in that one audition where I was like, of course, this answer is easy. I need to step away from this. I need to do what fills me, what fills my soul. And so it took a little bit of time, but once that permeated my mind, the decision was like that. It's like the decision when I decided to go to California, there was a culmination, but the decision was like that,
Yeah. So now you're in California.
Mm-hmm.
You have your whole life behind you and ahead of you.
Yep.
You made the decision to just train. Bring us from that point in your life, John, to today.
Yeah. So my training was already busy, but it skyrocketed once I made that decision. Once I feel like I learned more as an individual and as a trainer in 10 years than I did 20 prior. And my business skyrocketed. I teamed up with 4 other trainers. We had a facility. It was amazing. And then as family is always at the forefront of my life, I had an opportunity to move out of California. And I started seeing California go sideways for me. Whenever my family feels like they may be in danger, and I felt that way in California, as the homeless population and property crimes went up. Look, I have an absolute compassion for homeless people, but with that comes a lot of different potential violence. And I started looking at other opportunities, and I got an offer, and my wife did, to come to Austin, Texas. And we explored Austin and the outdoors and the family and the community and all that in bounds. And we came out here and we're like, we're moving to Texas. And so on our 3rd trip to Texas, we bought a house. And the same time, my buddy Sebastian Maniscalco, who had been struggling as a comedian, goes to the next level. I mean, this guy is the epitome of work ethic. He was grinding it for years. And he wanted to make me part of his team as he saw more success. I had introduced him to his wife. He got married at that point, was trying to have kids, and he asked me if I would go on tour with him. And so now if I move to Texas, although I love all my clients and my friends in California, it's a better place for my family in Texas. And all I have to do is board a plane and I can travel wherever he's traveling. And we go on tour together, and he starts selling out arenas, Madison Square Garden, Radio City Music Hall. I watch his career blossom. And I'm traveling 120, 130 flights a year, traveling around the world with him. And I do that for 2 years and have an amazing time. And then I also have the realization while I'm doing that I need to work within my community in Texas, and I need to be home for my family. And I don't want to miss their soccer games. I don't want to miss their baseball games. And when it's time to re-up on going back on tour, and I had another job offer, I'm watching one of my son's soccer games, and I said, you know what? I really appreciate the offer, but I'm going to stay home and opt for less money and watch my kids grow up and be part of that. And that's how I landed Texas. and takes me through, 2020, 2021 before I become paralyzed and come down with a rare autoimmune disorder.
Man, there's so much in your story, brother. So priorities, and anybody listening, sometimes everybody wants money, but money is just a tool.
Yep.
And I know everybody that I've ever met, well, I wouldn't say everybody, but most people that I've met that are truly successful, they're passionate about what they do, and then the money follows because they love what they do.
Yep.
So, and just for our listeners too, Sebastian blew up, not just in comedy, but he's a legit actor now. I mean, he's
Yeah.
making movies with Al Pacino, and he's, you know,
De Niro.
he's De Niro. Yeah. I mean, these are some, I think he was in The Irishman and some other major films, and he does a fantastic job. So you're remarkable. He's remarkable. Your whole group is remarkable. But when you're taking this journey, you have your God, you have your family, you have, your purpose and the training. Bring us to the part where you get sick. Did you feel it coming on? Did it come on out of the blue? What happened there?
Yes. So we go back to 2020. The world gets kind of turned upside down with COVID.
What's
Business-
COVID? No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
You want to know what's crazy? I actually had COVID last week. I got it. I never even know it was around anymore. A client had it. They gave it to me. And I had a different journey this time than I did last time. I kicked it in like 4 days and got over it with some pretty easy tricks that work for me. I'm not saying they can work for everybody, but work for me. So we have COVID. And if I'm guilty of something, and I'm always trying to find balance, I'm always trying to learn and be a better person, is I can get inundated and immersed in my work too much. And I'll work 10, 12, 14-hour days. And it goes back to my childhood, but I love what I do and it's easy to fall into. And I always working towards balance. So my kids get COVID. I'm teaching jujitsu to kids. So I have a lot of exposure. My kids get COVID. To them, it's nothing more than a blip on the radar screen. They have sniffles and colds. My wife gets COVID. And then I ultimately probably get it from them, maybe get it from teaching jujitsu, whatever. But if we go back, we had to quarantine for 10, 14 days, right? And so this is where my life was out of balance, is I cannot sit down. I get diagnosed with COVID. I'm on the assault bike that day with no medication, doing an hour on the assault bike. I'm working out. I'm making projects around the house that I got to do. Oh, we need to do this, do that. I got a brand new house. There's no projects, but I'm making shit up, right? Till I run myself ragged. I spend no respect to COVID, and I ended up getting way sicker than I should be. I get dehydrated. COVID hits me harder. So I recover from COVID, and I also get a bacterial infection where someone's toenail in jiu-jitsu cuts my shin, and I get a thing called cellulitis. And I bring these both up because we don't know where I got Guillain-Barré syndrome from, but the physicians are like, it could have come from COVID. It could have come from the cellulitis. So I get through cellulitis, they give me some antibiotics. And the next thing you know, at night, I start not being able to feel my feet. My toes start going numb. I can't feel my toes, but I don't say anything to anybody because masculinity, don't say anything. I just put my nose to the grindstone. I keep going. Now my feet from my toes get numb and my hands start getting numb. And I start losing my urine stream where I can't pee, although I have to pee, and my vision starts getting blurry. So I have numbness in my feet, my hands are numb, I can't pee, and my vision's getting blurry. And I finally break down after about a week of this, and I go to my wife, I go, babe, I can't feel my feet. I don't know what's going on. In the middle of the night, I've been getting up and taking ice baths because it's the only thing that's relieving some pain and getting me some sensation back. I go, when I get home from work tonight, maybe we should go to the doctor. And thank God for my wife, Cheyenne, who's balanced me. She's like, you're not going to work tonight. We're going to go to the urgent care and we're going to get checked out. So we go to urgent care and they start doing these tests. Now, I'm not someone that's faint from needles or anything like that, but I pass out in there. I go unconscious in urgent care. And they start running my vitals and they start running tests. And they go, look, we don't want to scare you, but you could have a rare autoimmune disorder that we don't have the ability to test for. and it could be GBS, which stands for Guillain-Barré syndrome. I've also heard Guillain-Barré syndrome, or you might have MS. So we recommend you go to the emergency room and the hospital a mile down the road. They will have to do a spinal tap on you, draw your spinal fluid out, and look at the proteins in there to see what you have going on. So I start getting weaker by the minute, where it is now difficult for me to stand up. It's difficult for me to lift my legs up. And now from my shin, from my kneecap down, I can't feel anymore. I got no feeling. I got no reflex in my knees, any of that. So we go to the hospital, and I'm like, I describe it as like a battery that's just being drained. It's hard for me to shake hands. I'm getting weaker. My whole life is defined by my physicality, and now I can't even call upon it. So they take me into the room. They do a spinal tap. They draw fluid out of my spine. And they said, it's going to be an hour before we can possibly find the results out. You are welcome to stay here, or you can, because I live a mile from the hospital, you can go home. If you go home and these symptoms start progressing, if you start losing sensation in the rest of your body, you need to come back in here immediately, because if you have what we think you have, it will ascend up your body and it will shut your lungs and heart down. And that'll be it. You'll be done. So I go home for an hour. I close my eyes for 20 minutes. I'm not a big fan of the hospital. For me, it's a better place to stay at home. I have bad memories of being in a hospital. My dad was passing away. Although I love hospital workers and nurses and doctors and all that. So in 20 minutes, the next thing you know, I can't feel from my waist down. And we have to go back to the hospital. I have the symptoms they're talking about. So we get back to the hospital. They have to wheelchair me in to the ER, and they bring me up to the ICU in a wheelchair because I can no longer stand. And as I'm going, brother, through the ICU, I see people in all different states of despair. I know some of these people are not going to make it out of the ICU. And I say I made a definitive decision at that moment that no matter what I have, which I don't know at this point, I am never going to complain. I'm never going to for a second say, woe is me. And I am going to absolutely find a way out of this situation. So they're wheeling me to my room. I can hardly stand anymore. And I make that decision, which ends up being a pivotal decision, because I don't want any negativity permeating my mind. So they put me in bed. They lay me down. I'm in isolation. And they start running all these tests on me to get a definitive answer. And I get so weak that I can no longer pick up my arms. I can no longer pick up my head. So the doctor comes in the room. I can hardly turn my head to see who's coming in the room. And at one point, and it's from the extent that I'm in the ICU, I can only move my eyeballs. It's not a pretty picture. I end up soiling myself. I shit myself in there. I code out when they're taking me to get a CT scan. I code out, and every doctor and nurse in the hospital comes down to my assistance. I have to get catheterized, can't pee anymore. And it's not a great situation, but I make some decisions to, number one, I'm going to surround myself with positive vibrations. Ziggy Marley was one of my clients for 20 years and a dear friend. His dad's Bob Marley. And I start playing Bob Marley 24/7 in my room. So I have something that is always bringing me to a positive place. I start praying and asking my body initially to stop eating itself, because basically GBS is your body's own immune system eating the myelin of your nerves, and you start eating the sheath of your nerves and getting weaker and weaker. So I start praying. Go ahead.
I don't want to cut you off, but
Go
there's so much going on. I just want to make sure it's clear. You are perfectly healthy, athletic, training, teaching jujitsu, and then you get COVID, and then all of a sudden these other things start happening. What's the time period from you're healthy to you're in this emergency room?
Sure. So I'm perfectly healthy in November. I get COVID like second week of November. I get through COVID by the end of November, 2 weeks. And then December, all of a sudden, this stuff starts happening where I cannot feel my hands anymore. Now, go ahead.
And GBS, last question. Did you ever see the movie Lorenzo's Oil?
A long time ago. I don't think that's what they have in Lorenzo's Oil, but I can be wrong.
Okay, no. I don't know. That's what I was asking because I'm just trying to connect dots here. And I didn't mean to interrupt your story, but I wanted to make sure I understood. This wasn't over 6 months. This was like, you're healthy. Then you get COVID, pushed it too hard. And then a month later, you're just like rapidly falling apart.
And when it started falling apart, it started falling apart. Like when I went back into that emergency room, I went from that day being a guy thinking I was going to go to work for 12 hours to I can't stand. And all of a sudden, I can hardly move my head when I'm laying down. It was happening at a rapid pace.
And you're coding. That is no
coding, dude. I passed out in the urgent care. There's another time I passed out at home that I didn't even get into, where my wife called the fire department. I passed out in the hospital a couple times, and it's embarrassing. It brings you down to what's important in grassroots really quick, man. What is important in your life, right? We're worried as a kid about a pimple being on our face. All that shit goes away when you're crapping yourself in bed and you no longer control your bowel movements or even stand up to go pee or any of that stuff. So it goes away pretty quick. And so I have the music, I'm praying, I'm meditating, I'm grateful, I'm focusing on that. I'm focusing on my body healing itself. Now, I don't discredit Western medicine at all, but I'm a firm believer in the mind having such power. And I start asking my body to start healing itself. And then I start demanding my body start healing itself, all on a mental level. And then my wife, God bless her, makes a decision because I can no longer swallow. I have to have everything pureed. And this is not a knock on doctors or nurses, but the hospital food is garbage. And I feel horrible that they have to nourish themselves in the most time of need. When we need them and they need nourishment, they have minimal to no choices. There's French fries, chicken fingers, mozzarella sticks, garbage to nourish yourself on a cellular level. I don't mind if they have that stuff, but they should have healthy options if somebody wants them. Whether you're a patient and you're trying to heal or you're a doctor or nurse trying to heal people, we need you to be at the top of your game. We need to put everything we can behind you to help you be successful. So my wife, God bless her, she's so smart. She goes home and starts pureeing organic foods because it's the only thing I can swallow is puree. And she starts bringing me that. So I'm working on a cellular level. I'm working on a spiritual level. I'm working on a mental level with my music. And then over the course of 10 days, I go from, at one point, only being able to move my eyeballs to getting out of the ICU and getting wheelchaired out of there and sent home to start doing therapy. And I make a decision that I'm going to do therapy 7 days a week. I go to the physical therapist 5 days a week, and I do 2 days a week on my own. And at some points, that means picking up a pen. At some points, that means just squeezing my hand. But I never, ever give myself an option to quit. And I keep working day in and day out until I get back in about 3 months to pretty much 95% mobility. And I get the inspiration while I'm in there that this doesn't happen to me, it's happening for me. And how do I do something positive with this? I'm listening to an audiobook while I'm in this state, and I make a decision to write my own book. And this would have never been written or put together if it wasn't for me being paralyzed with GBS. And I put together a book, and it becomes a instant Amazon #1 new release.
Congratulations, man.
Thank you, brother.
And when did that, what's the name of the book and when did it release?
So, Confessions of a Hollywood Trainer. My life's journeys in this, a lot of details we didn't go over, but it released we technically released it in February, but self-publishing, it didn't really hit till March of this year. And it was a huge success. I was blessed to have great people surrounded. I had a great guy that started off as my editor, and then I gave him co-authorship, Scott Burr, who did an amazing job, extremely talented guy. another guy whose book I was inspired by, Richard Bressler, helped me along the path, and it came out worldwide on audio and regular paperback. And I would have never have done that. I would never have done that unless I became paralyzed. It would have never happened. I was too busy. I would have never put these things down. I would have probably not had the inspiration. And once again, if I can do this with dyslexia, I've never written anything. I'm so bad. I think I mentioned to you this in the pre-interview that when I type, I'm so bad that spell check is like, we have no idea what you're trying to do here. I can't help you. We have no suggestions. And if I can do that and put a book together and have this journey that someone out there listening that thinks they may be at the end of their rope, that there's no hope, that they're in a dark place, that they may not have the ability, trust me, you do. Have faith in yourself, put in the work, surround yourself with positive people, use the tools from your past in your tool belt to navigate these waters. Lose the shame, and you can and will do anything if you're willing to put in the time and the work.
Man, that's fantastic advice. I mean, the whole episode, ladies and gentlemen, is packed with value and packed with just wisdom. But if you just took that last 30 seconds, that kind of summarizes everything, right? So to wrap up this phase of your life, John, was the final diagnosis GBS, or what was the final diagnosis?
That's the final diagnosis, Guillain-Barré syndrome, GBS. Yep. Okay.
And then now, is it 100% behind you? Is that something you have to deal with for life? What is the future?
So my fingertips, I can't feel them. My toes, I can't feel. My big toes on my thing. My memory is nowhere near as good as it used to be. And I'm wearing glasses for the first time, and I didn't have this stuff ahead of time. So I look at it, if this is the price I have to pay to go through what I've had to do, I'm fine with it. I don't complain about it. Maybe it'll change one day, maybe it won't. Whatever. I'm not worried about it. I don't even think about it. It's just who I am right now. And so if it gets better, fantastic. I'm working every day for it to get better. I do something physical every day. I meditate every day. I do gratitudes every day. I do breathing every day. And if this is how I have to live the rest of my life, dude, I'm blessed. I'm blessed.
Yeah. And GBS, it sounds similar, but it's not Gilbert syndrome. How do you pronounce it again?
Guillain-Barré syndrome. I had some doctors also say Julian Barr. So I've heard it both ways. I think it sounds a little more exotic if you say Guillain-Barré syndrome.
Yeah, no. There's something that's Gilbert syndrome is something that like people from Mediterranean descent have, but it's not dangerous at all. You just have a high bilirubin level in your liver enzymes, no big deal. But what you're talking about is something totally different. I'll put links in the show notes. I'll have you spell it for me, and we'll put in the show notes. People can
you
get
want me to spell it? You better put GBS.
Yeah, no. We'll look it up and I'll put it in the show notes for them. But we'll make sure you verify that spelled right.
Okay.
So cool. Well, John, this has been great hanging out today and getting to know you and hear your life journey and the wisdom. But between your birth and today, is there anything we missed on your journey, or is there any final thoughts you want to leave our listeners with?
I think we'd have to go 10 hours and I'd bore everybody if we had to cover everything. There's a lot of stuff in the book that I'm not proud of, but are part of me. It's things that happened in Alaska. One thing that I think most people really enjoy is what happened at Burger King in my idiotic youth, how I called 911 on myself and all over a grilled chicken sandwich. I was going to kill people over a grilled chicken sandwich. Embarrassing stuff. But listen, my life is about helping as many people as possible. I said this on the last couple podcasts I've been in, and I do mean it wholeheartedly. I have an absolute soft spot in my heart for veterans, for our first responders, for our teachers. And I know not everybody can afford what I do. And I want to offer people that I will do things pro bono. I will donate some of my time to help you navigate through these waters, to help your business, to help your nonprofit. So if there's something I can do, I will gladly help our first responders, our teachers, our doctors, our nurses, and I'll donate my time to help them, whether that's in nutrition, in mindset, come to speak, whatever. You have my information here. I'm sure David's going to post my social stuff. Reach out to me. If there's something I could do to help, I'd be honored to do it. And together we can achieve amazing things.
Amen. Yeah, no man's an island, right?
Yeah.
So we do it together. So, all right, John. Well, I really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much. Now, again, we're going to put everything in the show notes, but what's the best way for someone to reach you?
Sure. On Instagram, it's John.Petrelli. On Facebook, it's John Petrelli. You can go to my website, confessionsofahollywoodtrainer.com or johnpetrelli.com. The book is found on Amazon. It's on iTunes. It's on Audible. Hope you enjoy it, man. My life's journey's in there. And if you think you've heard some crazy stuff here, there's even more embarrassing stuff in there that we haven't even covered.
Awesome, my friend. Well, thank you so much, John. And any last thoughts, any final words to our audience before we close this episode?
Yeah. We go through this life and this journey, and it's really so short. You should be able to look back and go, man, I have gone and tried everything I wanted to try. I've loved the people I wanted to love. I've expressed love to the people I wanted to. Don't leave any stone unturned. Live in your passion. You let fear go. Don't worry about making mistakes. Mistakes are beautiful things. Don't live in fear. Surround yourself with people that are not only going to support you, but they don't have to agree with everything you say. And you can achieve anything. This is what I'd like you to understand, that you literally can go after and do anything if you're willing to put in the work. I appreciate you all. I appreciate you for giving us this platform. Without you creating this, it doesn't happen. I appreciate people for sitting through this, whatever part you listen to. I'm super grateful. And I just couldn't be more appreciative, buddy.
Oh, man, it's been awesome, John. And ladies and gentlemen, all over the world, we love you. If you have any questions, reach out to John, myself. We'll help you in any way we can. Again, veterans, first responders, teachers, check out John's website and resources, and he's going to take extra special care of you. That was very generous of him. And with all the information in this episode and every one of our episodes, like our slogan says, don't just listen to this great content, but do what you know you need to do. Repeat it like John did in his life each day so you can have a great life in this world, but most importantly, in eternity to come. So I'm David Pasqualone. This was our friend, John, and we really appreciate you, John. Again, if there's anything we can do to help you, my friend, let me know. And if not, I look forward to getting together in person soon, catching up.
Thank you, brother. Thank you, David.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, have a great one. We'll see you in the next episode. Ciao.
The Remarkable People Podcast. Check it out. The Remarkable People Podcast. Listen, do, repeat. For life. The Remarkable People Podcast.